During the debate, Saturn was opposite Biden's midheaven, sinking his reputation, and Pluto was closely square his moon, unraveling his health. This is Saturn, girl, and we're watching history unfold before our eyes. This 2024 US presidential election is a big deal. The stakes are high. Our very lives are in the balance. At least mine is. Vladimir Lenin once wrote that there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. This is one of those times. We are living through a decisive and destructive period in American history, and honestly in world history. And the astrology backs that up. That's right, this election quite possibly affects the entire world. With several disturbing Supreme Court decisions and Project 2025 looming, which would effectively make Trump a dictator and America a Christian fascist theocracy, along with President Joe Biden's abysmal performance during the first presidential debate, the Democratic Party is scrambling, and many are even calling for Joe Biden to step down. But who would take his place? We are certainly living in unprecedented times. If you haven't heard of Project 2025, you need to Google it right now. This is a big deal. I'll link a video by lawyer Leeja Miller in the description below. She explains it all very well. It's fucking scary, yo! In this video, I'm going to talk about the astrology of the 2024 US presidential election and what it says about the direction we're heading in as a country. We'll look at both Biden and Trump's charts, along with the charts for the United States and Election Day itself. We'll also talk about the major transits happening over the next few years and what they mean for us. So let's take a look at the candidates, shall we? Let's start with Joe Biden's chart. The first thing that jumps out at me is that 12th house in Scorpio. The 12th house is self-undoing and often represents self-destructive behaviors like drug and alcohol abuse, isolation, abandonment, tragedies, shipwrecks, and even mental health issues. You may notice that Biden has 4 planets in the 12th house, and he's had his fair share of tragedies, hasn't he? His 7th house ruler of marriages and his 5th house ruler of children are all in the 12th house. He lost his first wife and his daughter in a car wreck. Not quite a shipwreck, but close. He later lost his son Beau Biden to a brain tumor. And his other son Hunter is famous for his self-destructive behavior, including drug and alcohol abuse. You'll also notice that Biden has his 11th house ruler, Venus, in his 12th house, which often makes someone unpopular and unsupported. And Biden frequently remarks that he's always been counted out. Of course, Trump has a heavy 12th house too, and we'll get to that in a bit. But Biden's 4th house ruler, representing his father, is Jupiter, exalted in Cancer, but also in the 8th house of death, losses, and other people's stuff. Joe Biden frequently references the story about how his father losing his job, of course, 8th house, affected him greatly. The family had to move, and his father ended up being a successful used car salesman. I mean, used cars are very 8th house, aren't they? But Jupiter also rules his 1st house of self. And yes, Jupiter is quite happy being exalted in Cancer, but he's retrograde. That means that all the good stuff of Jupiter happens later in life. Biden tried to run for president several times and was unsuccessful. He became a senator at 30 years old, which is quite young. He had a long career in the Senate, but his eyes were always on the presidency. I mean, it took him 48 years, but he eventually got there at 78 years old. Now, Joseph Robinette Brandon, as I like to call him, is 81 years old and about to turn 82 in November. His 10th house ruler of recognition and life direction is also in the 12th house. That's Mercury, which can suggest working behind the scenes and getting a bad reputation. It's true that he had a checkered legislative past, including the 1994 crime bill that ended up targeting Black and Latino Americans, but he's also done a lot of good as president. He got the U.S. out of Afghanistan. He's the first president to ever walk a picket line with workers. He's done more for climate change than any other president. Brought down the prices of prescription drugs and insulin, and invested in infrastructure. But Biden's policy of supporting Israel with weapons for their siege on Gaza has eclipsed all those successes. And I mean negatively. Then, of course, the debate happened. If you didn't watch it, please don't. It's excruciating to watch. All you need to know is that he trailed off, lost his train of thought, and didn't counter any of Trump's lies. During the debate, Saturn was opposite Biden's midheaven, sinking his reputation. And Pluto was closely square his moon, unraveling his health. Biden's age and deteriorating condition are causing a lot of alarm among Democrats as to whether he can actually beat Trump in November, given the high stakes we face. This election could mean the end of democracy in the United States if Trump gets elected. The Supreme Court just gave presidents full immunity to do whatever they want. Now they are essentially above the law and get to act like god kings or emperors. Ironically enough, Joe Biden was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee overseeing the confirmation hearings of far-right Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who has been one of the instrumental figures in bringing all these shenanigans about, including overturning Roe v. Wade. Then we have Project 2025, which lays out a detailed agenda for the next Trump presidency, including getting rid of thousands of civil servants and replacing them with Trump loyalists. It also promises to take away women's reproductive rights, make contraception illegal, get rid of the Department of Education and the Environmental Protection Agency. And it will take away the rights of queer people and eliminate us from public life. It will also make trans people illegal. Given the dire situation that we face, many Democrats are calling for alternatives to Joe Biden, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Now, let's look at Trump's chart. See here, Trump also has a heavy 12th house. That includes Venus, his 10th house ruler of reputation and life direction. We frequently see this in people who are perceived as villains and have a bad reputation. This also includes someone working behind the scenes, and of course, he was known for wheeling and dealing and deceiving behind closed doors, which earned him a reputation of ruthlessness. And, like Biden, he has his 11th house ruler of popularity in the 12th house, indicating that a lot of people don't like him. He was even unpopular as a real estate mogul in New York, pissing off both politicians and residents with his self-aggrandizing development plans. But he has the sun, the first house ruler of self, conjunct his north node in the 11th house, and trine Jupiter, the planet of luck and success. These placements indicate fame and, well, he's been quite successful, hasn't he? Although he owes much of it to his daddy. Now, Mars rules his 4th house, representing his father. And he has him in the 1st house, which indicates his father was powerful, selfish, and a narcissistic man, but also that he was the biggest influence in Trump's life. Trump himself has said this repeatedly, that his dad taught him to detest weakness and to only value one thing: winning. Was his dad Charlie Sheen or something? Trump also has his Leo Mars conjunct his ascendant, which makes him very aggressive and competitive, and extremely into himself. I mean, I have my Mars trine my ascendant, and my ego could eclipse the sun. I also think of Leo Mars sort of like Emilio Estevez in The Breakfast Club. Remember, he plays the jock who talks about his dad telling him basically all the same stuff that Trump's dad did. You gotta win, Andrew. You gotta be a winner. We don't tolerate losers in this house. In fact, during the 2016 Republican National Convention, Trump came out on stage to the Queen song, "We Are the Champions." He literally walked out on the line, "No time for losers, 'cause we are the champions of the world." I mean, how audacious is that? The combination of both fame and infamy have made Trump a formidable force in the world of politics. Now, Venus also rules his third house, and she's in the 12th house, which often indicates spreading lies. For example, claiming that Democrats rigged the 2020 election, or that they abort babies after birth, which doesn't happen. This is called murder. You'll also notice that he's a full moon baby, meaning that he has something to prove. But as I said earlier, Democrats are fearing that Biden doesn't have the stamina nor the mental acuity to defeat Trump. Nearly 70% of voters agree that Biden should step down and allow someone else to run in his stead. But who would take over if that does indeed happen? The most likely candidate would be Kamala Harris. She's the only one who could get access to the millions of dollars raised by the Biden campaign. So let's quickly look at Kamala's chart, shall we? You'll notice that she also has the 10th house ruler of career and reputation in the 12th house of self-undoing and isolation. To be sure, she's been relegated to working behind the scenes, as well as staying out of the public eye in the Biden administration. But the 12th house also rules prisons and prisoners. And she was initially a prosecutor before her political career took off. In fact, she vehemently opposed the death penalty and promoted the Back on Track program in California, which was intended to reduce the rate of recidivism, or the number of repeat nonviolent offenders going back to prison. It offered them educational and assistance programs to help integrate them back into society. The 12th house also rules substance abuse, and so it's not surprising that she ironically got a bad reputation for prosecuting more nonviolent drug offenders than her predecessor during her tenure as Attorney General, although fewer of them were sentenced to prison. Indeed, Kamala had a checkered career as Attorney General. She walked a fine line between progressivism and being tough on crime. Her straddling of both sides of the California divide was likely due to her political aspirations. Like Trump, she's also a full moon baby, and remember, they have something to prove, don't they? What she really has going for her is Mars in her third house. This means she can be tenacious and aggressive when speaking, debating, or interrogating. She's well known for being quite tough while questioning witnesses during committee hearings. She famously put the pressure on then Supreme Court Justice nominee Brett Kavanaugh during his confirmation hearings. I have no doubt that she would indeed be a formidable candidate against Trump, even with her low approval ratings. But what does timing have to say about these candidates? Who has the most auspicious conditions to win the presidency? First, we need to look at transits, progressions, and zodiacal releasing. After that, we're going to talk about the United States birth chart and what it says about this whole mess. Again, let's start with Biden. In terms of transits, what immediately pops out at me is that his 10th house ruler, Mercury, will be exactly conjunct his ascendant on election day. Remember that the 10th house is achievement and life direction. He also is in a 10th house profection year, which makes this very auspicious. However, Mercury is in detriment in Sagittarius, and so far, we've seen a steady decline in Biden's reputation. And remember, Saturn was exactly opposite his midheaven during the debate, which is also a sign of someone's reputation getting worse. And Saturn also rules old age. Now, Venus rules his 11th house of popularity, and she will be in his first house, which is also auspicious. So we have several signs that he could do very well and possibly win this race, and a few that he won't. Now, I don't see much in the progressions for election day, so let's look at his zodiacal releasing. The first thing I notice is that he'll be in a level 2 Aries period on election day. This could be good for Biden because he has Jupiter in Cancer, making an inferior square to Aries, which means Aries is behind Jupiter in the zodiac. It's not as powerful as a superior square, which would be the sign ahead in the zodiac, but Jupiter being exalted in Cancer helps a lot. He starts a level 2 Taurus period in July of 2025, which is opposite his Scorpio Mars, his most malefic planet. And I think that could be when he finally, passes away. But let's see what Trump's timing has to say about all this, shall we? Now, in terms of transits, what I first notice is that Saturn is going through his 8th house of losses, which could indicate losing money, or someone close to him, or even the election. Now, you'll see that Mars is separating from a conjunction with his natal Venus, his 10th house ruler of achievements and recognition. So this could be quite bad for him. Mars is his most malefic planet. But what did Trump's progressions say? Well, what trips me out about his progressions is that Trump's progressed ascendant went into Scorpio just a few weeks before the January 6th coup attempt. This indicates fighting behind the scenes. Now, I didn't see much else in his progress chart, so let's talk about zodiacal releasing. The first thing that jumps out at me here is that he enters a level 1 Leo peak period in 2025. That's his first house. This is a very big deal. It's one of the most important and active periods of his entire life. However, he has Mars, his most malefic planet, in Leo, which could indicate big accidents, conflicts, or even violence. In fact, he was in a level 2 Aquarius period opposite that Leo Mars when January 6th went down. And the whole mess was not good for him. For election day, though, he will be at the end of his level 2 Aries period, which is opposite Jupiter, his most benefic planet. So he could get quite lucky on election day. Similar to Biden, it's a mixed bag. But I do think that the astrological conditions look like a tumultuous Trump win that will result in some very unpleasant things, including for him. But I wonder if Kamala's situation looks any better. Actually, it does. For transits, Jupiter, her 10th house ruler of achievement and recognition, will be conjunct her ascendant in Gemini, which is very auspicious and confers luck, although Jupiter is also in detriment in Gemini. Saturn is also going through her 10th house, which can be difficult for career and reputation, but it also opens up opportunities in my experience that we didn't expect. Kamala Harris is in a first house perfection year, though, which is also auspicious for her election chances. In terms of progressions, she's still riding the wave of her progressed full moon, which was exact last October. But we still see the effects of this manifest for the following year. This often represents a high point in someone's life and could improve her chances. In addition, she's currently in a level 1 Pisces peak period for zodiacal releasing, which is opposite her natal Venus, her most benefic planet, since she was born at night. This is a big deal for her and a pretty good sign. She also has a level 2 Gemini period that makes a square to Venus, which is another good sign. And on election day, she will be in a level 4 Sagittarius period, which makes a square to her Venus, which is also good for her. So how about the United States' chart? What does it have to say about all this? Well, for transits, the first thing I notice is that Jupiter, the ruler of the first house of self, will be making a conjunction to the US's natal Mars. And this can indicate things getting out of hand. I often see this transit correlate with explosions and expanding conflicts. Now, Saturn going through the 4th house, though, brings struggles with the past, with patriotism, and with national heritage. And we've already seen about 90 years of progress overturned by the Supreme Court and the far right. Now, Mars will also be approaching a conjunction with the North Node, indicating violence of some sort to me, or at least the potential for violent conflicts erupting. Now, in terms of progressions, the US just had its progressed new moon in March. And this is when it became apparent that Trump and Biden would be the presumptive nominees. Progressed full moons are a big deal. It's sort of like starting over from scratch, which could be both a good and bad sign for things to come. Does it mean the end of American democracy or its revival? We'll have to see. For zodiacal releasing, though, the US is currently in a level 1 Gemini period, which contains Mars. So typically this isn't very good since the US has a day chart and Mars would be the worst planet. Furthermore, we will be in a level 2 Sagittarius period, which is also opposite Mars, and again not a good sign. But this leads to a level 2 Capricorn peak period in June of 2025, which is opposite both Jupiter and Venus, the two good planets, but is in a square to Saturn, which brings additional challenges. However, Venus and Jupiter are indicating that these challenges can be overcome. Moreover, the chart for election day itself has some ominous transits as well. The primary one that worries me is that Mars will almost be exactly opposite Pluto. I see this transit often correlate with violence. I really believe that there will be political violence on election day. Indeed, many poll workers have already been threatened with violence. Many have even quit after being threatened by Trump supporters. We also have a solar eclipse in Libra in early October, which will be conjunct the US's natal Saturn in the 11th house of popularity and supporters, and not too far from the midheaven. Now, this could be damaging to the United States, either financially or in terms of being isolated from the international community. But what also concerns me are the bigger transits going on now and in 2025, especially next summer. You see, Saturn will join Neptune in a conjunction about a year from now, next July and August. This transit has brought us the dissolution of empires, especially in Russia. For example, Saturn was conjunct Neptune during the Russian Revolution, and during the death of Stalin, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it could mean upheavals for the US next year as well. Now, what worries me even more is Uranus entering Gemini, also about a year from now. Uranus was in Gemini during the American Revolution, and each time Uranus has gone back into Gemini, our Uranus return, if you will, the US faces existential threats. The first Uranus return of the US ignited the Civil War. The second Uranus return brought us into World War II and the rise of fascism. Will we see fascism, or World War, or Civil War? Or perhaps all of them together? I'll tell you my predictions in just a moment. But the elephant in the room is Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto was last in Aquarius during the American and French revolutions. This transit often represents violent upheavals in power relations, often where old and established structures are overturned and new ones emerge. This happened when King Henry VIII declared himself the head of the Church of England, which effectively eroded the power of the Catholic Church over European monarchs. So what are my predictions? Well, I see two primary scenarios. Number one, Biden stays in the race, which to me inevitably leads to a Trump victory. If that happens, we will likely have fascism thrust upon us, and the United States will become a Christian fascist dictatorship. I also think that Pluto in Aquarius indicates an eventual uprising, or civil conflict perhaps, against such a regime. But I don't really like that scenario. The second scenario that I see is that Biden steps aside and Kamala Harris becomes the nominee. Now, her chances of winning look much better. However, if she wins, it may save American democracy, but it will also motivate the far right, who have been preparing for civil conflict for many years, to engage in another violent insurrection against the United States government and its citizens. But I think any Democrat winning the election would spark a civil conflict, just like Abraham Lincoln's victory did. To me, this is the best scenario, but it still looks really bleak. On a positive note, though, after alarming transits like Uranus and Gemini, the US often enters a period of progress and greater inclusion. For example, after the Civil War, we had the Progressive Era, which was a reaction to the terrible inequality and abuses of the Gilded Age. Following the 1940s, we had one of the most prosperous times in American history due to the progressive policies of the New Deal. I think we'll also see positive progressive developments as Uranus leaves Gemini, but it doesn't mean it's all doom and gloom between now and then. I know I sound quite pessimistic. I mean, I'm Saturn girl. That's kind of my MO. But remember, our ancestors faced such times in the past. During bleak periods, we still have to attend to our daily lives, take care of our children, put food on the table, and still find some modicum of enjoyment in life. We don't have a choice in the matter. The wheels of fate are already turning. I always say that fate is just what happens to us. We have no control over it. Destiny, on the other hand, to me, is how we respond to fate and the challenges that befall us. 99% of life is fated. We can't change it. I mean, I made that number up, but you feel me. The 1% that matters, though, are the choices we make as things crumble all around us. In fact, this is what astrology teaches us: to be poised and prepared for whatever comes our way. For as the 2nd century ancient astrologer Vedius Valens once wrote, those who have trained themselves in the prediction of the future and the truth have acquired a soul that is free and not enslaved, do not think highly of fortune, and do not devote themselves to hope, nor are they afraid of death, but instead they live their lives undaunted by disturbance, by training their souls to be confident, and neither rejoice excessively in the case of the good, nor become depressed in the case of the bad, but instead are content with whatever is present. Those who do not desire the impossible are capable of bearing that which is preordained through their own self-mastery, and being estranged from all pleasure and praise, they become established soldiers of fate. Training day begins today. Thank you for watching. Like this video and subscribe to my channel. Please also consider tipping me. You can give through Super Thanks below or use my PayPal link in the description. It helps me keep making such wonderful content. And remember, I do the best readings. It's science. You can book through my website, saturngirl.org, or contact me directly. All my info is below in the description. And remember, I love you. You're beautiful. And have a wonderful whatever it is you're having.